in Tech's webinar. I'm Astrid, a client success manager at Born, a tech Mahindra company, and I will be presenting today's panelist and host. So today's session is called Genius of Gratitude, and I cannot wait to present to you today's wonderful speaker. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them in the chat room and we will try to respond to them if time allows it. All right, let's get this started. So today's panelist is Janice Kaplan. Janice is a journalist, TV producer, and the author of 15 popular books, including the New York Times bestseller, The Gratitude Diaries, and her newest book, The Genius of Women. She was the editor-in-chief of Parade magazine and the executive producer of the TV Guide television group, where she created and produced more than 30 primetime network television specials. She has written for dozens of national magazines and websites and appears frequently on TV shows, including Today and Good Morning America. She now hosts the daily podcast, The Gratitude Diaries, on iHeartMedia. Lastly, she graduated magna cum laude from Yale University and won Yale's Murray Fellowship for her writing. Janice, welcome and thank you so much for gracing us with your presence. Before we start this call, I'd also like to introduce our hosts, Debbie Menin and Sumit Grover. Debbie is the VP of Tech and running the media entertainment business. Formerly, she was the EVP of the Advanced Imaging Society, which is the entertainment industry organization that represents emerging technologies for content creation. During that time, she helped run a Women in Tech Awards ceremony, honoring 13 distinguished women in entertainment, which is where her passion originated from. She's an entertainment and media professional with a background focusing on running entertainment strategies, ad tech, martech solution, and advertising sales management positions. Debbie has also held high-level positions at companies such as Nexstar Media General, Yahoo, MTV Network, Condé Nast, and Variety. Our other host, Sumit, is responsible for the growth of Tech Mahindra's cable, media, and entertainment business in Americas. In addition, he is also responsible for few top strategic global accounts growth as a special charter for the company. After a successful stint of jumpstarting CME business in Japan, for which he was based in Tokyo, Sumit has relocated back to the US and currently lives with his family in New Jersey. And on this note, Sumit, all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Astrid, for that great introduction and setting this stage. Good day, everyone. Hope you and all yours at home and work are safe and healthy. I'm Sumit, your host, and in case you did not notice the 5G, IT, and ER in the name, look again. Please do call us for any 5G technology and engineering needs you may have. It gives me a great pleasure and a deep sense of honor to host such a special guest today on our show. I'm truly excited to have Janice Kaplan, a New York Times bestseller author, with us today, and I cannot wait to hear from you. Thank you, Janice, for joining us.
My great pleasure to be here, Sumit. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Friends, from our initiatives like Nanhi Kali, empowering the girl child through education, to a flagship career development program where stars are identified, we call that FAME, Female Achievers in Making, the inspiring women have always been just around the corner for us at Tech Mahindra. I'm particularly proud to share yet another recent accolade that got awarded to Tech Mahindra for being one of the best workplaces for women by Great Place to Work Institute. I feel privileged to welcome all of you to this episode of our series, directed and produced by our most exciting business at Tech Mahindra, the Cable, Media, and Entertainment, where we offer experience, technology, and engineering solutions from glass to glass through innovative people, products, platforms, and possibilities. Janice, I promised this was the last piece of commercial advertisement in the season today. Okay, how many of you have heard this? Isn't it true that we are all more blind to what we have than to what we have not? These words by Audre Lorde, an American writer, always make me wonder what leads humans to the way they are. We all at some point get blind and forget to be grateful for what we have. We become insatiable and keep running behind new things. But this year for sure has made each one of us grateful for every day. Gratitude is an important practice for one's peace and well-being indeed. And who more than Janice can stress on this fact through her wonderful experiments and research on gratitude. I'm sure after listening to her, you will take back examples of how it can turn your life around and help with challenges, especially through times of this pandemic. If you're not excited already, we will also discover some intriguing insights from Janice on her new book, The Genius of Women. If you've not read these books, I would highly recommend you grab one as soon as you can. I'm sure Janice's research on women's accomplishments from past and present in different fields will help many overcome obstacles in our lives and help on the path to success and, more importantly, happiness. Here's to the women who forged a path, mentored others, and created a voice for those who didn't have a platform. Let's kick it off with none other than our very own Debbie Menin.
Thank you. I have to say that I'm very grateful to be here today. We'll be talking today about the genius of gratitude in a two-part session. The first will be focusing on gratitude, of course, and the second, the genius of women. But how about if we make an agreement with ourselves to be grateful for at least one thing, just one thing every day? So in regards for today, I'm grateful that my friend, Janice Kaplan, is on planet Earth here making a difference, and that she's here with us today. Janice and I used to work together when we were at Parade magazine. If you're not familiar with Parade, it's known as the largest magazine in America. And at the time, it reached a third of the country. I used to, and still do, look up to Janice as one of the most powerful people that I know, let alone women. She made such a big impact at Parade. What she decided to publish in the magazine every single week could either change someone's vote or their opinion, or even help raise millions of dollars at the time. Given that Janice has also been a TV producer, and I was put in a position that was newly formed as a branded entertainment role, we had the great pleasure of driving all over Hollywood together, meeting with the networks, pitching new shows, pitching ideas, and it was all to extend the platform. We had a lot of fun with Tom Hanks and Entertainment Tonight, didn't we? But what was more important here is that Janice and I had meaningful conversations that formed into this lasting friendship with mutual appreciation, leading us to where we are today. And might I say that it was an enjoyable experience? Wouldn't you agree, Janice?
It was great. And if anybody gets a chance to drive around Hollywood with Debbie, I highly recommend it. It's an unforgettable experience for many reasons.
Anyway, after we had both left Parade, I recall you telling me, Janice, that you received a phone call from the John Templeton Foundation. They loved the cover stories that you used to do, and they asked you to do a project for them. And I was thinking this is a good time for you to share your story, maybe the beginning of how you journeyed into gratitude.
Sure. Thanks so much, Debbie. And thank you, Sumit, for that lovely introduction and for the opportunity to talk to your terrific company and the people who are here. I did start getting involved in gratitude after I left as editor of Parade and after Debbie and I had both left the company. And yes, that large foundation did come to me, and it started as just another project. And I didn't know it was going to be a project that would end up changing my life. I started it by doing a national survey on gratitude. And the results of the survey started coming in, and they were really surprising. Let me ask the people who are listening here to think about some of these questions. One of the questions we asked was, do you think grateful people are happier? So think about it for a second. I can't see you all, but I imagine there are a lot of nods out there that yes, grateful people are happier. And it was something like 95% of people said, yes, grateful people are happier. And then we asked, are you grateful for family and friends? Again, think about it. Again, I bet there are lots more nods, and we had, yes, 95% of people saying grateful for family and friends. And then we asked another question. We said, do you express gratitude? And all of a sudden the number plunged, and now it was less than half. I think it was about 45% of people said that they expressed gratitude. And so I started to realize that we have what I began to call a big gratitude gap. On the one hand, we have something that we know is going to make us happier. And on the other hand, we don't do it. And because I'm a journalist and had been the editor of Parade, I got to go on the Today Show and lots of other places and talk about the gratitude gap and sound very smart. And then at some point it occurred to me that I was as guilty of it as anybody else. And that was the point at which I decided to challenge myself and see what would happen if I spent a year living more gratefully. And I'll give you the ending right here at the beginning, which is that nothing particularly special happened that year, but it ended up being one of the best years of my life. And just by thinking about gratitude every day, just by changing my attitude, just by having a different perspective, I ended up happier than I ever had been before. And one of the reasons I love talking about this book and talking about this subject is because I know that everyone can end up with one of the happiest years of their lives too.
Janice, thanks for telling us that story. I hope we're all in the same position after we're done with today's. Janice had written this book, The Gratitude Diaries. By the way, you can buy it on Amazon.com. And I was just wondering what it is that inspired you to write that book. I'm going to guess it's because of this survey you put together.
Right. I think, yeah, what I just said, after I started the project, starting it as a project, I realized that really this was going to be an interesting book. And what started as a literary device of I'll spend a year living more gratefully, as I said, ended up being something that very much changed my life.
I for you. I've been thinking about how to go from grief to gratitude. And I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to kind of retrain or reframe your brain to think through gratitude when you're going through a hard time. You suggested at one point that there's a way of gaining a great perspective if you think about how you'll feel a year from now, which is brilliant. But would you mind walking through that?
Sure. Well, I think one of the key lessons of gratitude really is about reframing, about turning a situation around. And sometimes I find myself now actually physically stopping when I'm upset or frustrated and thinking, okay, how can I think about this moment differently? How can I think about this moment in a more positive way? I think one of the surprises is that we tend to think that it's events that make us happy or not. And all the research shows that that's just not the case, that it's not events that make us happy, but our attitude towards them and how we look at them. And a lot of people will say things to me as I'm traveling. They'll say things like, well, I'll be grateful when I have something to be grateful for. And I always want to say, and I don't because I'm polite, but I always want to say, no, you'll never be grateful, because if you wait for events to make you happy, you're going to be waiting for a very, very long time, because all of us can turn any situation around. We can all find, some reason to be happy or not happy, no matter what happens. I used to joke that I came to my epiphanies about gratitude on a New Year's Eve party. And, when I was standing there and I was thinking, what could make things better in the year ahead? And I thought, oh, I know, I could win the lottery, or I could move to Hawaii. And then I thought, I know myself. If I win the lottery, I'll complain next year that my taxes are too high. And if I move to Hawaii, I'll complain that I got sunburned. So I realized at that moment that it wasn't the events, but how we think about them. And Debbie, you mentioned thinking about things in how you're going to look at it a year from now. And that's a little technique that I came up with for a lot of people. And it came from the Nobel Prize winning economist and behavioral psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who in one of his books talks about the experiencing self and the remembering self. And the experiencing self is the person who is living through something right this very minute. And you're sitting, you're listening to this Zoom, maybe you're enjoying it, maybe you're not, maybe you're looking out the window, you're doing something. The remembering self is going to look back an hour from now, tomorrow, next week, and look back on this and think about it in some perhaps different way. What Kahneman points out is that the remembering self is often a lot kinder than the experiencing self. And when we think about what makes us happy, we have to think, are we talking about the remembering self or the experiencing self? So let me give you an example. You're going out for a hike, you're climbing up a mountain, it's hot, you're sweaty, you're tired, your legs hurt, you're thirsty. If I came to you at that moment and I said, are you enjoying your hike? You might say, not so much. But if I come to you the following week, you're going to remember that you got to the top of that mountain. You're going to remember how beautiful it was when you looked out. And you're going to remember the exhilaration you felt when you were coming down. And so I think what we're trying to do with gratitude is to make sure that gratitude isn't always the remembering self. It's not always in the rear view mirror, that gratitude is something you can have in that moment. And that trick of looking a year ahead from now, particularly Debbie, you said, if you're going through a period of grief or when something is going wrong, think about what you're going to look back on a year from now. And think about this bad day that you're having. And how do you want to look at that bad day? And probably what you want to be able to do is use that bad day to explain how you turned everything around and how you moved everything forward from that moment, and how that was an epiphany for you that you could move forward to get to this place where you are right now of happiness a year from now. And if you can think about that, if you can think about that path that you want to take, because we all want to end up being happy. And if you can think about that path that you want to take to end up with that happiness, I think that you're a lot more likely to end up there and to be able to start right now feeling that way rather than having to wait that whole year to get there.
Janice, those are great stories, but let's stay with the subject for a minute. Why should we have to teach ourselves to be grateful? You're talking about tactics that can help us. But why couldn't I just wake up today and say, I want to be more grateful?
It's a great question. And, psychologists actually say that we may be wired to look for the negative. And if you think of it in terms of evolutionary terms, it probably makes sense. When our ancestors were out gathering berries, if they found 10 delicious berries, it didn't really matter that they knew which was the most delicious, or if they went home and told all their friends about these delicious berries. But if there was one poisonous berry, they better know which was the poisonous berry, and they better be able to tell everybody about it. And we are all the descendants of people who were very good at recognizing and talking about the poisonous berries. Otherwise, obviously, they did not become our ancestors. And what has happened, though, is that wiring has continued even though it's not particularly necessary anymore. Most of us now buy our berries in the grocery store. We're not too worried about poisonous berries. But what has happened, how that has evolved into a modern sense, is that, think about this, if 10 good things happen to you in a day, and one bad, annoying, or frustrating thing happens, which one are you most likely to tell your spouse or partner about at dinner? Which one is most likely to stay in your mind? Probably the one bad thing, rather than the 10 good things. And so the point of gratitude is to get around that wiring and to remind yourself that, yeah, that bad thing did happen, but let's also think about the 10 good things. Gratitude doesn't make the bad stuff go away. It just puts it in perspective and gives you an ability and a reason to think about it in a different way.
I'm going to give you an example of something you told me about. You were in New York. It's a cold, blistery day, and you're walking down the streets, and a man was shoveling snow, and he accidentally threw snow on you. How did you, first of all, react to that? And what is it that you did to change your mind? And tell us a little bit about the no complaining zone. I like that zone.
Sure. Well, so yes, that was a day. I was in the middle of writing my book. It was a snowstorm in New York. I was walking down the street, and a person who was shoveling at the next apartment building didn't see me, and he gave a big swoop of snow right into my face. And Debbie, I have to admit, I did not respond in the most proper and ladylike manner. I probably started screaming inappropriate things in the middle of Manhattan. But I continued down the street, and as I said before about physically stopping myself, that was the time I did it. I actually stopped myself, and I thought, wait a minute, I'm writing a book on gratitude. I can't get this irritated about something like that. And I thought, well, what can I possibly find to be grateful for about this? There's a blizzard, and I just got snow thrown at me. And I thought, okay, there has to be something. And I thought, yes, I'm actually grateful that he's shoveling and I'm not. I'm grateful that I live in a neighborhood where there is somebody who is taking care of the sidewalks so that tomorrow I'll be able to walk on them and it won't be all iced over. And just those two silly little small thoughts made me feel different. And I actually turned around and I walked back to the gentleman who was shoveling, and he looked up a little anxiously, but I called out, "Sir, thank you for shoveling." Of course, he must have thought I was a little bit crazy that first I had been upset and now I was turning around to thank him. But I think that is something that we all can do, is to try to find that way to look at it differently.
I think that was a really, really good example. I think everyone on this call has actually been through something like that before. So it's nice to know that we've got tools to kind of just change the tune in our head, right? I want to talk to you a little bit about how gratitude can improve well-being. I know you had talked about that in your book, but is there a simple way to start being grateful?
Sure. There are lots of tricks to make yourself do that, reframing. I think one of the simplest things you can do, people talk about a gratitude journal, and I certainly kept a gratitude journal while I was writing the book, but I'm a writer. And most of you are not writers, and keeping a journal probably sounds like a chore, and gratitude should not be a chore. So one of the things that I recommend is to keep a slip of paper by your bed. So do this just for the next week. Just put a little scrap of paper next to your bed and tell yourself that every night before you go to bed, you're going to write down one thing that made you grateful that day. One thing, how hard can that be? So here's an example. You're going to wake up tomorrow morning. You're going to have your first cup of coffee. You're going to say, wow, that was really good coffee. Grateful for coffee, done for the day. That's what I'm going to write down on my scrap of paper. And that's okay, because you've started the day in a positive way. You've started thinking about things from a positive outlook. You've given yourself that one good moment. Or it's going to get to be 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're going to have had a terrible day. You're not going to have been grateful for anything. And you're going to remember that scrap of paper. And you're going to think, what am I possibly going to write down today? And you're going to stop for a minute. And you're going to look around and you're going to think, all right, I'm grateful that I work for this really good company. I'm grateful that maybe it's sunny today. I'm grateful that I have a friend standing here next to me. And once again, you've done something that changes your perspective, makes you think about things differently, and adds gratitude to your day.
What are you grateful for today, Janice?
Oh, that's not fair, Debbie. it's only noontime here. I get the whole day to think about it. Right now, I'm grateful to be able to talk to this audience about this subject and to share my books and my thoughts.
Oh, good. Tell us why you think people express gratitude less at work. I think that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, well, in that survey that I mentioned, people were less likely to express gratitude at work than almost any place else. And only 9% of people said they expressed gratitude at work. And many of you know that you spend more time at work than almost any place else. So it's really a shame to know that. I think a lot of people think that, they'll look weak or they'll look soft if they express gratitude at work. Well, here's another interesting statistic. 80% of people, actually 81% of people, said that they would work harder for a grateful boss. And 90% of people said that a grateful boss is more likely to be successful because nobody succeeds on his or her own. And I think that's so important for us to remember. If you do have somebody who works for you, remember to thank them. And it doesn't have to be for something special. It can be for something that they normally do, but that you want to recognize. And research, so many studies over and over again show that one of the main reasons we work, of course, we all want to get a paycheck and we all want to get paid appropriately, but people want to be appreciated and people want to feel that their work makes a difference and their work is being noticed. And so getting that appreciation and setting a tone of appreciation makes a huge difference in a company. And by the way, I think some of the most successful companies are indeed those that recognize the need for gratitude, have set up systems for it. And certainly by your company inviting me to talk about gratitude, I think that's a great sign for the kind of company that you do have.
Well, I have to say that I'm grateful for working at Mahindra, and I love that we were just acknowledged as one of the top places for women to work.
That's wonderful.
If we've been enjoying listening to Janice talk about just, a few areas of gratitude, I think you'll enjoy watching her podcast on iHeartMedia on the Gratitude Diaries. So Janice, how do we find you?
Well, they always say wherever you get your favorite podcast. So it's on Spotify and all the other services. But really, the easiest way is just to go to Apple Podcasts, and it's called the Gratitude Diaries. You can search for it there, and it is produced by iHeartMedia. So if you happen to have an iHeartMedia app, you can find it there too.
Wonderful. Well, let's pivot to the book, The Genius of Women, that Janice wrote. I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind telling us when was it published, and if you could give us a quick overview, that would be fantastic.
Sure. The book came out just before the pandemic. It came out in February of this past year, and the paperback will be coming out in this coming February. The book, I've written about women's issues for a long time. And what really interested me was because I have a positive attitude about it. And we all know the problems that women have faced throughout the centuries and up to this very moment. But what really interested me was how is it that throughout every generation, no matter what obstacles they face, some women have managed to soar so high and achieve so much. And how do they do it? And what is it that we can all learn from them and apply to our own lives? And by the way, Debbie, you asked what inspired me to write that book beyond that. Well, once again, it was a survey. And in this case, it was my friend Mike Berland, who's a pretty well-known pollster and strategist. And he had done a survey on genius. And he found that 90% of Americans think that geniuses tend to be men. 90%. That's a huge number. A lot of you are statistical people. You don't get anybody to agree on 90% of things. And when asked to name a female genius, virtually the only one anybody could name was Marie Curie. So Mike took me out to lunch one day. He said, "What do you think is going on here?" And I said, "I have no idea," but I pretty much spent the next 2 years trying to find out.
What difference did it make in your life writing this particular book?
It was so inspiring to me to find the many different women, both historically and right now, who are making such a huge difference. Personally, for me, if I can, share my own story, Debbie, you were very kind in your description of me as editor-in-chief of Parade, but I think one of the techniques I always used in my career was to be self-deprecating about things and to go, "Oh gosh, no, that wasn't a big deal," and to try to make people feel good about themselves by putting myself down. And as I was writing this book and interviewing these women, I really tried hard to stop doing that, because I saw what a difference it makes when women do speak up for themselves, when women do recognize the value of their own work and expect other people to recognize it too. There are lots of workarounds and techniques that women still do have to do, but that's not one of them.
We talked this the other day because I did notice you used to do that. And then what you would do is you turn the conversation into giving me a compliment.
Right.
Giving you a compliment. So I'm so glad that you actually worked through that. We all, right? Well, let's talk about genius for a minute. And by its very definition, it's really a talent that makes you different, unique, special, original, and it can change over time. When Janice wrote this book, what she did is she interviewed a number of different women, but there seems to be similar elements or patterns with each one of these women. What I thought would be really fabulous is to go through each one of them and give an example of a particular woman that she wrote about. And I urge you in the audience to think about these topics and think about the genius in yourself and think about whether or not you have these similar elements. So the first one was, everyone has at least one supportive person in their lives. I don't think that's that hard to do, but it was nice to see that everybody had that same storyline. Can you tell us about the roboticist, Cynthia Brazil's parents?
Sure. Well, the idea of having one supportive person is really important, because I think the first thing you have to realize, as you said, geniuses, or pretty much all of us, are something special. You have something different. And you need somebody who is willing to let you recognize that that's okay, that you don't always have to be like everybody else, that you can go ahead and be yourself. And the whole world is never going to be on your side. Whether you're a woman or a man, there are always going to be people who are telling you that what you're doing is wrong. And you somehow have to have the confidence and the strength to go ahead and say, actually, I think this is a pretty good idea, and I'm going to go ahead with it. So Cynthia Brazil, who you mentioned, was a roboticist. She is a roboticist at the MIT Media Lab, and she actually created the first social robot. It is currently in the MIT Museum. And she told me that it was her parents who were extraordinarily supportive of her when she was younger and took her to all sorts of science projects and science activities in museums and let her develop the way she wanted. She also had a mentor, and mentors and the people you work with are extraordinarily important. When she was getting her PhD, it was a time when most of technology and most of the idea of robotics was focused on taking over the things that people don't want to do. So it was doing the difficult physical labor and creating rovers for Mars. And that's what she was doing with her professor, her mentor at I believe she was at MIT at that point too, Rodney Brooks. And then at some point she realized what she was really interested in was social robots. And she had this idea, and she went to him and she told him about it, and he said, sure, go ahead. And it was the middle of her PhD, which is a time when you don't usually throw over what you're doing and try something different. But he gave her the courage to go ahead and do that. And I think if we can do that for other people, if we can encourage other people and give them the encouragement to go ahead and try something, that's a great gift that we offer.
I agree, parents, but also people that we work with. I think Sumit, really good example here at Tech Mahindra, where you can go to him and you have an idea that's unique, different, and he'll say, do it. And I love that whole idea that people give you the confidence that you can make anything happen, right?
Absolutely.
The other topic that have some similarities is about blinders to bias. And Meg Urey from NASA has an inspiring story here. Do you mind sharing that example?
Sure. Well, let me explain what I mean by blinders to bias. There are structural issues in the society that need to be changed for women, for minorities, for encouraging diversity. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But we all have only one life, and we all have only one opportunity for ourselves to get as high as we can and achieve as much as we can. And one of the things that I found over and over again was that these successful women did have those blinders to bias. They just were straightforward as they were going ahead. They didn't see any obstacles that would stop them. Most important thing I want to stress, though, is that when they got to the position where they could make change, they worked really hard to do so. So you mentioned Meg Urey. Meg is now a tenured professor of physics at Yale. She was, in fact, the first tenured woman professor of physics at Yale and the first woman head of the Yale physics department. By the way, it's 2020. I cannot tell you how many women I interviewed were the first in something, which is both nice and very depressing. But at any rate, Meg told me that she had wanted to be a NASA scientist when she was young. And indeed, she did end up at NASA before Yale hired her away. And she said that when she was young, there were no women in NASA in positions doing the kind of things that she dreamed about. And she said she told herself, oh, I know what it must be. There must be no women who ever wanted to do this before. And so figuring out nobody else ever thought of this allowed her to just think that there wasn't going to be anything to stop her. And so she just went ahead and did it. She said once she achieved what she did, she looked back and she went, that was baloney. Of course there were other women before me who wanted to do it. They just had too many obstacles in their path. Another great example of that is her colleague actually at Princeton, Jo Dunkley, who is also a tenured professor of physics at Princeton. And Jo was an undergraduate at Oxford. And she said that when she was there, people always talk about how women in science classes are afraid to raise their hand and afraid to speak out because they're the only woman. She said she never noticed that she was the only woman. And so she was never afraid to raise her hand or speak out. She just was herself. And again, that blinders to bias when there's nothing else you can do except be at that early stage of your career and achieve what you can. And both Meg Urey and Jo Dunkley, now that they are in positions of power and strength, do everything they can to help and mentor other young women. So it was an interesting example for me.
Let's talk about an example about you. The topic you're talking about here is interesting. It's the blinders of bias, or seeing beyond gender. I'm thinking about you for a minute, because when you used to be at Parade as the editor-in-chief, I always used to think, wow, she's this woman who's this editor-in-chief of Parade. But you used to come back to me and said, no, Debbie, I'm just an editor-in-chief of Parade. So can you tell us, your thoughts on that subject, when I might have said woman and you would just come back and say editor, the core belief of the belonging?
Well, it is a big difference. One of the women I interviewed for the book was Tina Landau, who's actually a Broadway director, and she's a terrific Broadway director. And when I interviewed her, which I think was 2018, she was the only woman nominated that year as Best Director for the Tony Awards. And by the way, I think that's probably the case just about any year, that there aren't too many women or any women nominated as Best Director. But of course, everybody was referring to her as woman director Tina Landau. And she said to me, I'm not a woman director. I'm a woman who directs. And I think that's a huge difference and hugely important. A woman director suggests that every woman directs the same way, and that the way we describe how you direct and what you do is by the fact that you're a woman. To say I'm a woman who directs says, I'm a woman, that's great, I love that. I'm a director, I love that too. And they have nothing to do with each other. And I think one of the dangers that we fall into now is that when we talk about somebody as a woman scientist or a woman in technology, we sometimes think we're giving them a compliment. I often hear things like, oh, we need more women on boards and in companies because women are so much more collegial and cooperative than men are. Again, it sounds like a compliment, but are women really more collegial and cooperative than men? Well, some women are more collegial and cooperative. Some men are collegial and cooperative. Some women are leaders, some men are leaders. And once you define somebody that way, or define a whole group of people that way, you limit the other side of it, or you suggest what they're not. So I think we really need to stop lumping 50% of the population together and referring to people as women scientists, or the two women who did win the Nobel Prize this year in chemistry for the discovery of CRISPR, Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuelle Charpentier. And I had written about them at great length in my book, which is actually a good story about the men who were trying to write them out. But I saw so many headlines that said, 2 women win Nobel Prize. Like, well, how about 2 scientists win Nobel Prize? They didn't win it for being women. They won it for being brilliant scientists. So I think that ability to look beyond gender is very important in so many of the women I spoke to.
Do you, on that subject, seeing beyond gender, Fei Li, the genius artificial intelligence woman, I should say person, executive, she never conformed to respective stereotypes. Is that another story you could share?
Sure. Fei Li is a wonderful woman in artificial intelligence at Stanford. I'm sure many of you know about the work that she did. And she grew up in China. And she said that, interestingly, you would assume that she was the most victimized by stereotypes. But she actually, back to our first topic, she had a family who really supported her and encouraged her to do whatever she wanted. One of the stories I loved about Fei also is a slightly different topic than it's probably your next topic. It's more in that sense that you hinted at before of a core belief in yourself. Fei Li came up with a new way to teach computers to see. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with it because it's really the method that's used all over now, and that is leading to driverless cars and so many other things. She's a young woman, and when she started it, she was even younger. And people were telling her all over that she was just nuts and that this wasn't going to work and she should try more traditional methods. And she was never going to get her PhD if she persisted in this nonsense. And I asked her, well, how did you get through that? And she said, well, I thought about what everybody said. And, you take the criticism that makes sense and you decide, you see what's just a tax, and then you take the things that you think might make sense. And I thought it through, and I thought, no, nothing they were saying convinced me that my idea was wrong. And I also thought, if I am wrong, so what? So I've wasted a year or two, and then I can go on and try something else. And again, that core belief, that sense that I believe in this, I'm going to give it a shot, and nobody is going to stop me on it, is really important. And probably, I'm sure Sumit could tell us that it's particularly important in technology, where breakthroughs happen when people try something new and are willing to go in completely new directions.
I think that's all about having a positive approach, right? I have an idea, but I'm positive about it. I know when you were interviewing these women, you never heard fewer complaints. So that's another element that they all had in common about having a positive approach. Would you like to expand on that?
Right. Well, we did start with the gratitude diary, so I look for positivity everywhere. But I do think that it's true. I do think that so many of these women were just so positive, and I think you have to be. I think being negative drags you down and keeps you from being successful. One of the women who I just admired almost more as much as anybody else that I spoke to was Dr. Frances Arnold, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2018. And her work was in doing something new with proteins and enzymes. And like Fei Li, when she was starting out, she was told, you can't upend chemistry the way you're trying to. It's not going to work. And again, I asked her how she had the courage to do it. And she said, I did not doubt myself. And I thought, wow, if anybody still needlepoint that on a pillow. How far could we all get, men and women, if we were able to say, I did not doubt myself? It's pretty extraordinary. And Frances Arnold looks like the woman who has just the golden life. She's an attractive woman. She won the Nobel Prize. She wins everything. And yet, when we spoke at great length, I discovered that she's actually had endless tragedies in her personal life. She had two husbands, both of whom died tragically. She had 3 sons, one of whom she lost to a tragic accident. And yet, she herself had breast cancer, was out of work for a year or two going through treatments. In any one of those things, it would be enough to be knocked out. Any one of those things would be enough for somebody, male or female, to just give up their job and say, I can't go on. But she found strength in the work that she was doing, and she found ways to be positive about what she was doing. And she was kind enough to know who I was when I interviewed her, and she said, I looked for gratitude. She said, you can understand that. I looked for reasons to be grateful. And she said, when I lost a son, I tell myself every day, I have 2 wonderful sons, and let me focus on that. And it's tragic. It's almost hard to even say that. But I think that ability to be positive and to go forward really did help so many of these women, just like it would help men in similar circumstances.
Yeah, I see that that's the only way to get through something like that. She is such an inspiration. Thank you for sharing your story. You had also talked about a multifaceted life. It's another similarity, and I like this one. So engineers Andrea Goldsmith and Daphne Kohler, we know, brought game-changing innovations to their fields, but they were also role models and moms as, with their children. I think they've got a story here that would be nice to hear.
Well, yes, with both of them have done extraordinary work in engineering, and both of them have kids. And when I was interviewing Andrea Goldsmith, who actually is now at Princeton, she was at Stanford at the time, her daughter was at Stanford as an undergraduate, and her daughter knocked on the door and came in, and and of course, mom let her interrupt the conversation. It was not a problem. Daphne Kohler, who started Coursera, the online educational system, we were talking and she had her phone sitting in front of her, and she kept checking her texts to see which of her children had gotten home and who was eating dinner. And it reminded me of somebody else I had interviewed named Sion Bylock. And Sion Bylock is the president of Barnard College in New York. And it's a women's college. It's across the street from Columbia, though, so they share classes. And she said that she thinks it's really important for any woman to have many different selves. And she didn't mean that in a Three Faces of Eve way. We're not talking about schizophrenia, but to have many different selves that you can rely on, different ways that you can think about yourself. So she's the president of a college. She's a psychologist. She's a mom. She's a parent. She's a friend. And she said that there are some days when she thinks of herself as just the best person in the world because she's done something really smart in her psychology lab. And there are days she thinks of herself as the worst person in the world because she forgot to pack her daughter's lunch. And I think that's something we can all relate to, that there are parts of our lives that we succeed in at sometimes and not at other times. And I think it's true for men also. Men have often been able to have those many parts of their lives. And it's wonderful that more and more women are discovering the value of that too.
We've just gone through 6 similarities of the women that Janice interviewed in this book. I'm going to review them because I want you to think, what similarities do you have? Do you have supportive people in your life? Do you have blinders to bias? Do you see beyond gender? Do you have a positive approach? Do you have a core belief that you belong? Do you have a multifaceted life? Now, I'm going to add one more to Janice's list, and let's add gratitude. So after interviewing all these women, do you think that gratitude was another similarity?
Well, I think that that goes with positivity. And I think that being able to appreciate the work that you do is extremely important. So, yes, I think that I think you limit yourself by looking at the negative, by being unhappy. Like there are bad things in any workplace, in any home life. There are problems that we all have. Frances Arnold, the woman I mentioned just before who won the Nobel Prize, said that when she was coming up, there were a lot of men who didn't support the work she did, but she said, there are a lot of men who did. And so look for those and look for the people who are going to support you. And if they're difficult men, just don't work with them. And, I think many people tell me that one of the things they like about The Genius of Women, my book, is that it's not angry. It's not a book against men. It's a book to remind all of us about the possibilities that we have and how we can help each other and how we can help each other reach our own potential. I think one of the geniuses who I talk about in the book was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And one of the things that she did when she was a lawyer fighting discrimination cases was to bring cases where the men were the plaintiffs, to point out that men suffer from discrimination, from gender inequality as much as women do, and that we all benefit by equality. We all benefit when people are allowed to be the best that they can be in whatever it is that they're doing.
Oh, okay, it's inspirational. About parents for a minute, because parents have a role in the development of their children. And, in your book, you talked about the animated movies that depicted women in stereotypical roles. Could you talk a little bit about, I think, the place that these parents should play to make sure that their children are not stereotyped?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I talk in the book about a few Disney movies, including The Little Mermaid, which has gotten a lot of attention, or did about a year ago, because it's being remade as a live action movie. And The Little Mermaid is a particular bugaboo for me because it drives me crazy. And I remember seeing it for the first time and not being able to believe it. If you don't remember the story of The Little Mermaid via Disney, it is that Ariel, the beautiful mermaid, wants to live on land. And she can do that by getting the love and kiss of Prince Eric. I think it's Prince Eric. But the way she can do that is that she has to not talk or not sing. She has to be mute. And to me, what better way is there of telling little girls to shut up and look beautiful? And, I often joke that last year at Halloween, there were a lot of little Ariels knocking at my door. And I asked my husband if we could put up a sign that said "No princesses allowed." And he didn't think that that was a good idea. He is fortunately more rational than I am. But, in some ways, would they be getting any worse message from me than they're getting from dressing up as Ariel? Now, look, I know that parents putting their daughters in Ariel costumes or getting them little Ariel backpacks don't think that they're sending that message. But in many ways they are. Kids are really smart. Kids hear stuff. Kids pick up those very subtle messages of what we expect of them and who we expect them to be. But I've been asked before when I argue against princesses, and somebody in the audience invariably says, "But my daughter loves her princess costume. Am I supposed to take it away from her?" And the answer is no, of course you're not supposed to take it away from her, because we do have social pressures. And until the entire society changes, we can't ask one little girl or little boy to be completely different and to not be part of that world from which they're getting social sustenance. But I think what you can do is you can take your little princess and you can bring her down to NASA. Let her watch a spacecraft take off sometime, or find a great video of what's going on right now with the spacecraft that's up at Venus collecting material. Up at the asteroid, collecting material from there. Those are great videos. Those are really exciting. They're fun to look at. And I think what we can do is to make sure that we offer the other side. So you don't have to take something away. You don't have to say, no, you can't be Ariel, though I wish you could. But you can offer another alternative and make sure that sons and daughters see as many alternatives and as many possibilities in their own lives as they possibly can.
Thank you for sharing that. We've got two more questions here, so let's circle back around here. We just learned a lot from Janice and about gratitude and about the genius of women, but with some of these women, they have had the best educations, they have tremendous jobs, they're breaking the barriers. It's sounding a little far-reaching, so meaning to me. So I guess the question is how should we apply what you've just said to our lives? And I'm just going to keep going for just 1 minute. I think we all have genius in us, really. And I was just wondering if you had advice for us today so that we can embrace our own gifts and make something exceptional happen in this world. What would be your advice?
I think you're absolutely right. And genius is not, I think a mistake we make is thinking that genius is an absolute, that either you have it or you don't. But being a genius is not like, being class president where you get elected and that's it. That's what you are for the rest of the year. Genius changes in how your story gets told, in who tells the story. And I think most important, we have to understand that genius needs to be nurtured and genius needs to be recognized. And I use genius in a very broad way in this book. So I don't just mean people who have won Nobel Prizes, even though we did talk about a few of them today. I do mean all of us. And I do think that our talents and our abilities for all of us need to be nurtured and need to be encouraged and then need to be recognized. And I think some of the points that we've just been talking about positivity, about a sense that you belong, about seeing beyond gender, I think if we can encourage all of those things in ourselves, if we can have the strength and courage to believe in the work that we do, if we can ask mentors for help, if we can talk to the people who we trust to ask what we can do better, I think that we can all encourage and nurture genius and talent and success in ourselves and our daughters and sons.
Gaming session coming up with the webinar, and I was interviewing one of the ladies and we were talking about her superpowers. She goes to Comic-Con and she does cosplay and she dresses up. And I said, what is your superpower? When you think about it, we all do have our superpowers, but if you ever asked yourself that question, and then how do we embrace that and live through it? So I think it's a great topic, but I think what we'll do is close here because I think that we've really had a big lesson here that we've received from Janice. And Janice, I want to thank you so much for helping us understand how to live life with gratitude a little bit more every single day. I think you're going to make a difference in people's lives today. So Astrid, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I will definitely put a little notebook on my side table now just to write something I'm grateful for. And I actually really loved your mention about Disney movie because my dad was always very reluctant to let me watch Disney cartoons based on how it represented women, but also gender roles. And at the time, as a child, I was very frustrated with him, right? But I'm very grateful with his approach, and I probably will adopt the same with my kids eventually one day. But it was very interesting. It touched home right away. So thank you, Janice, really for joining us, for being part of this, and for really being an inspiration. I mean, this was really a great, and I feel grateful, really, which I think is the message that we want to all leave with. So for anyone who might have joined late, again, Janice is an amazing podcast called The Gratitude Diaries that you should definitely check out. And she also recently released her newest book, The Genius of Woman, which I cannot wait to read. Debbie already has it. I also want to thank our hosts, Sumit and Debbie, for putting these amazing events together and making sure that we always have the best panelists. And lastly, I want to thank all the attendees for joining. Before I let you go, I also want to let you know that there will be another session in the Women in Tech series on November 6th called Breaking Barriers, Women in Gaming. That should be an interesting one as well. We will be sending more information on who the panelists will be and how you can sign up. Janice, thanks again so much.